Once upon a time, there was a boy called Fionn, who was a very curious boy. He loved to ask questions. Why is the sky blue? Why are the leaves green? Why do the birds sing so loudly in the mornings? Fortunately, his foster mothers, Bomal and Leith, were wise women, medicine workers and warriors, and they could answer most of his questions. And over the years, Fionn grew to be confident and skilled in many things. He could stalk, he could hunt, he could source medicines from the plants in the woods, he could prepare a meal, he could be quiet and still and allow the birds and the animals to come to him. And he could fight. He knew how to hold a sword and a shield and a spear and fight like no one else. And his foster mothers were so proud of him as he grew into a strong young man. But there came a day that they realised that they could no longer answer all of his questions, and that he needed to go out into the world and learn more about the ways of men and the ways of being a leader, because that's what he was destined to do, become one of the greatest leaders of all time. And so Fionn set off from the woods with his bag to find Finnegas. Finnegas, the great poet, the one who had been there at battles, who had seen kings negotiating treaties, who had wandered the lands and knew how everything worked. Now Finnegas was camped at the side of a river where he'd been for several years because he was trying to catch a fish, not just any fish, but the salmon of knowledge. Around the pool in this river, there grew 9 hazel trees. And as you know, hazel trees are one of the first trees to colonize the land after the Ice Age. And in their roots, they grew and imbued all the knowledge and wisdom that happened in the land. And they distilled it all in a hazelnut. And every year into this pool, the hazelnuts from these trees would fall, and the salmon that lived there would eat them. And legend goes that whoever caught and ate that salmon would get the knowledge for themselves. And so Finnegas, being the wisest and most knowledgeable man in all the country, decided that it was his duty to learn everything that there was to learn so that he could pass it on to others. Fionn found Finnegas by the side of the river and helped him with his camp. He hunted, he cooked, he cleaned, he ran errands, and he would sit and listen to Finnegas, telling his stories, telling tales, singing songs, learning about the world, and having all his questions answered. They were happy there by the river. One day it was really hot, and Fionn came down to the river bank just as Finnegas had cast his first line of the day. Fionn took off his shoes and paddled at the edge of the cool waters. Suddenly, an eye appeared breaching the surface of the water. The giant salmon rolled and disappeared again. Fionn and Finnegas were shocked. It was the most they'd ever actually seen of the salmon. The next moment, Finnegas felt a bite on his line, and he pulled and he pulled, and the most terrific battle ensued. The fish pulling one way, Finnegas pulling the other. It lasted for hours. Finnegas was exhausted. The poor old man wasn't sure he was ever going to land this fish when suddenly he did. And as he pulled the fish ashore, he collapsed under a tree, panting. He asked Fionn to take the fish up to the fire for him and to cook it for dinner. But he warned Fionn not to try even a single bite of the fish, because the knowledge was meant for him and him alone. Fionn readily agreed and carried the salmon up to their camp, where he put it over a stake over the fire and turned it carefully and slowly, making sure that it cooked evenly. And the smell of this salmon filled the woodland clearing, and it was the most sweet, delicious smell that Fionn had ever been aware of. And he was so excited for Finnegas to try this fish, because then he would be able to ask him all the rest of the questions that he had about the world and how it worked. Just before the fish was ready, a giant blister appeared on its skin, and Fionn bent over to look at it. And at that moment it popped, and the oil landed on his thumb. Ow! Oh, that hurt! Oh! Fortunately, the salmon was just about ready. So still, with his sore thumb, Fionn took it down and put it on a giant platter and took it down to Finnegas, where he was still resting under the tree. When Finnegas opened his eyes and looked up at Fionn, he immediately knew something was different. "Boy," he said, "have you eaten some of that fish?" "No," said Fionn, "of course I haven't. It's here for you, master." "Are you sure that you didn't taste any of it?" "Well, no," said Fionn. And then he explained about the blister and the oil popping on his thumb and putting it in his mouth. But he didn't try any of it. He didn't eat anything. "Oh, I see," said Finnegas. "I have been foolish. I realise now that this fish was never meant for me. Instead, it was meant for you, Fionn. So sit down and share this meal with me." "What do you mean?" said Fionn. I haven't got all the knowledge in the world." "Yes, you have," said Finnegas. "Put your thumb back in your mouth." And Fionn put his thumb in his mouth and touched it to his teeth. And suddenly he realised that he knew everything there was to know in the world. Everything. The answers to all his questions were there. Shocked, Fionn sat down next to the old man, and they shared a meal and talked long into the night. And the next morning, Fionn got up and packed his bag and set off into the world to find his destiny. But that's another story, although maybe you've heard of Fionn, because he became the great leader Finn McCool, whose stories are still told of today.